Hello, everyone. Great to see you. I thought Andy was going to appear on the screen. And there we go. There he is. Hi, Andy.
Oh,
A
hi
little bit, a
Emma,
few
how are you
teething
today?
problems. I'm all right. How are
Yeah, I
you?
disappeared and I just reloaded myself a couple of times, but it seems to be working now. Welcome everybody, nice to see you. My name's Andy. I live in leigh-on-sea, and I suppose I've been somebody who would call themselves a Christian since I was 16 when I became a follower of Jesus on a youth camp. I'm a chocoholic and I play trombone. Well, I'm the best trombone player in our street. Let's just leave it like that, shall we? Who are you?
I'm Emma. Welcome. Whatever your views on life and faith are, I like asking questions. I would not have called myself a Christian or a person of faith or a religious person until I was in my 20s. In fact, when I was 11, on my first day at secondary school, we had to fill in this form and it said religion. And the teacher said, you can put atheist if you want. And I said, what does that mean? And she said, oh, that means you don't believe in God. So I'm like, okay, fine. And I wrote that, but I didn't know how to spell it. I'm not an atheist anymore, but still very much interested in discovering, exploring spiritual things. So looking forward to our conversation tonight, Andy.
Yeah, it's good. It's going to be good. Let's hope the technicals don't let us down. So I guess for many of us, it's been a really tough time, hasn't it? Maybe you found yourself trying to make sense of what has actually been going on. Perhaps wondering if there's actually a God at all, and if so, what's God been letting all this stuff happen? Life and Soul has been developed to help people explore spiritual things, and we've been going for a number of years now, whether you see yourself as religious or not. And some of the questions we're going to try and tackle, I won't promise you any ideal answers, are things like, if God made the world, why is it just so messed up? And that's what we're going to think about tonight. Next week, we're thinking about why people so horrible to each other. And then things like, does God care if things go wrong? And where can I find hope? And so on and so on. Now, Life and Soul is interactive, so we're hoping you'll make some comments in the chat as well, or maybe contact us via the Facebook or emails or whatever during the week as well. So Emma, you.
Okay, I'm having a few problems hearing you, Andy, and I'm guessing others might. So unfortunately, I think we've got a bit of a poor connection. But I'll just keep going, and hopefully you'll be able to jump in. I know
Right.
you're on with two devices. You might want to perhaps use your other one. But while Andy's fiddling with the technology, I've been thinking about this whole question of why does God let rubbish stuff happen? If there's a God out there, why does God let all of this bad stuff happen? And so my starting point for thinking about this was creation. Creation, an interesting word, perhaps quite an emotive word. So perhaps the first thing that comes to your mind might be creationist. You might be thinking about the Bible Belt in the United States, for example, where some schools aren't allowed to teach evolution because that's seen as going against the teaching of the Bible. Well, I don't have a problem with evolution. Most of the Christians I know don't have a problem with evolution. It's not a problem to me to believe that God made the world, but also that everything that we see today evolved, that might be the way in which God chose to make the world, if that makes sense. I had the great privilege of studying theology when I went to study to become a minister. It was in a Baptist college in Oxford. And while I was there was a debate between Rowan Williams, who at that time was the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Richard Dawkins, very well-known biologist, evolutionist, and very well-known atheist as well. And it was fascinating hearing the conversation between these two men with these incredible brains. I didn't manage to get a ticket to see it live, but I was in one of the overflow theatres and I saw a live stream of it. And at one point, the person who was chairing the conversation turned to Rowan Williams, the Archbishop of Canterbury, so the head of the church in England at that time, and asked him, do you accept that the first humans had non-human ancestors? In other words, do you accept evolution as a way of understanding how human beings came about, that we evolved from apes, and therefore at some point, in some mysterious way, we stopped being apes and we started being human beings? Do you accept the first human beings had non-human ancestors? And Rowan Williams said, yes. Not all Christians would agree with that, but an awful lot would. So for me, creation, it doesn't mean I have to switch off my brain. It doesn't mean that I have to ignore science. The Bible says God made the world in 6 days. I think 6 eons, 6 million years, billion years, whatever. Doesn't bother me so much. For me, what the Bible tells us about creation tells us that we're important, and that the non-human world is important because God made us. We were made by God. The Bible tells us that when God made us, we were very good. Sorry, Andy, I'm hearing a bit of feedback there, but it's great to have you back with us. Sorry, Andy, I'm just moved you there so that you can play with the sounds. Apologies, folks. Hopefully we'll get Andy back with us shortly. So the Bible tells us God made the world. It tells us that when God made the world, God looked at it and said, I did a good job. This is very good. We matter, in other words. Psalm 139, the Psalms are these beautiful poems, songs of worship in the Bible. And there's a psalm where it says, you, and the psalmist is talking to God, you saw my unformed body, you knit me together in my mother's womb. So it's a really beautiful way of getting across the idea that God made us, God knit us together, that we matter, we are important, and the non-human world too is important, because God made it all. Right, I'm going to try and get Andy back now.
Hooray! Is that better with the feedback?
It is better. It's better. It's good to have you with us. Hopefully you heard some of that, Andy, but I know you've seen
yes, I was seeing some of it. The last thing I heard was that you said that we matter, that people actually are important, and also the rest of the world as well is important. I've got a couple of quotes which I like, and one is by Dennis the Menace, which says the best thing you can do is get good at being you, which I quite like. Another one I like is, you are unique. You may not think that the world needs you, but it does. For you are unique, like no one has ever been before or will come after. No one can speak with your voice, say your piece, smile your smile, or shine your light. No one can take your place, but it's yours alone to fill. And if you're not there to shine your light, who knows how many travellers will lose their way as they try to pass by your empty place in the darkness. I just think that summarises that each person is vital, however they view themselves. And I think it's important we understand that God loves us as we are. So there we go, Em.
Yeah, I love the Dennis the Menace. Brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I just say that's actually Dennis the Menace in America rather than Rubino, but don't tell anybody I told you that. It's a secret.
Okay. So, creation. God made the world. God made us. It's very good. God did a good job. But we know that creation isn't a perfect work of art. Our bodies, I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so we're all face to face, aren't we, with our fragility, with the fact that our bodies are vulnerable. In previous Life and Soul live streams, I know we've touched on Stephen Fry. He a few years ago gave an interview to an Irish television network, where he was asked at the end of the interview, what would you say to God if after your death you discovered it was all true, God did exist? What would you say to God if you saw God face to face? And the first words he said were, bone cancer in children, what's that about? It's a good question.
It's a very difficult question, but absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, in other words, you know, he kind of bypasses all, you know, the fact that, yeah, okay, human beings are rubbish to each other, and we're going to, I know, think about that next week. But Stephen Fry is saying, you know, how dare you create a world where there is so much suffering that is not our fault? And it's a great question. Andy, you and I have also posted conversation about the book that I wrote about my own experience of infertility, and the fact that, you know, my body can't do what most other people can do pretty much effortlessly. And that was something that I had to come to terms with. You know, I can't create life in the way that God can, and most others can. You know, my body has limitations. I've been very fortunate. You know, there are all sorts of other physical suffering that others go through that I haven't, but But I kind of had to come to terms with that, you know, okay, creation, God made me, but I don't quite work, you know, it's not quite working the way it's meant to. I mean, I sort of had to come to terms with that, Andy, and personally, I came to the conclusion that I have a fragile human body with limitations, and my body came to the end of what it was able to achieve.
Yeah.
That God didn't change the laws of nature for my benefit. God didn't magically extend my fertility. And that was how I, in coming to terms with it, that's the conclusion that I came to.
And can I just say, I imagine there may be some folks who are listening to this now who may not have had infertility problems, but other stuff as well, which they found very difficult coming to terms with, and thought, if there's a God there who's a loving God, how dare you, sir? I think was one of the phrases that Stephen Fry used.
Yeah. And you know, I'm not under any illusions. The things I've suffered in my life are nothing compared to what some people go through. And so I think the reason why I felt it was important for us to start by thinking about creation is the idea that kind of God made the world according to certain laws. You know, and so our bodies are fragile. You know, as a woman, my fertility is finite. You know, we can't all do everything. There are certain limitations to what our bodies can do. And likewise, you know, the laws of nature, gravity, you know, if we fall off a high building, we're going to get hurt. That's part of the law of nature. And so part of thinking about this question of why rubbish things happen is understanding that. But it is very unfair, isn't it? Because some people live till 95, you know, other people get sick very young. Through the course of the pandemic, there's been some people talk about how, you know, those who've particularly suffered, particularly got very ill and died with COVID, have often been those with underlying health conditions or people who are very elderly. And then there's been this reaction on social media kind of saying, what are you trying to say that older people don't matter, or that people with underlying health conditions don't matter? And of course, absolutely they do. Absolutely they do. But I kind of wonder whether part of the anxiety underneath these conversations is us desperately trying to make sense of it, trying to think, you know, oh, okay, these are the reasons why people get really sick, you know, trying to understand. Otherwise, if you see it as just being completely random, it's much more scary. But yeah, I mean, living through a pandemic, it focuses the mind, doesn't it, on these kind of questions?
Oh, goodness me. I know we've talked before on Life and Soul about how it's affected many of us mentally, and anxiety, which has come from who knows where because of what has actually been going on. So not just physical stuff, but mental stuff as well. Many of us have had to battle with. And I've had a couple of instances of anxiety, which I've never experienced before during the pandemic. So who knows? Yeah, very difficult. Very difficult. Yeah.
So I guess, Andy, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on this. Part of the answer to the question of why does rubbish stuff happen?
Yeah.
Is that God makes the world creates the world, I should say, according to certain laws, and doesn't intervene and doesn't change those laws. It doesn't bend the laws to protect people. You know, the fact our bodies are vulnerable to viruses and bacteria, hence the pandemic, you know, that sort of thing. So yeah, that part of my answer, Andy, why does rubbish stuff happen, is that you know this is the universe we live in. But I know you and I have slightly different views on this, don't we?
Yeah, I think we do, because I'm somebody who believes that God does sometimes intervene, and maybe for me that's more difficult than just to say God doesn't, because my question is, why does God do some things? And let me give a few examples. About a year ago, there was an 18-year-old, a friend of ours knew, called Jess, and the doctors actually said to the parents, you better go and say goodbye to her because she's not going to make it. A number of us all over the country started praying, and she did make it. And I checked up on her today, and apparently things are fine. So did God intervene in that situation? Those sort of things. And also I believe that God intervened with Jesus, of course, coming into the world and actually showing us and doing amazing things, doing things outside of nature, turning bread, you know, feeding 5,000 people with 2 rolls and a few fish, things like that. Was it 5 rolls and 2 fishes? I can't remember now. There we go. And he could change the weather and things like that. So I think God does sometimes intervene, but why does he do it sometimes and not other times? Why is it sometimes I get just the verse in the Bible I need, it seems, that God has actually spoken to me, and other times it's like I'm banging my head against a brick wall, nothing is actually happening. So for me, that's actually a probably more difficult question, that sometimes I believe he does, and my experience says that sometimes he does, but often he doesn't. So why, as you said, is a baby with cancer, whereas a 95-year-old goes on and on, for example. And life does seem to be unfair. And it's difficult. I know we want to explore this over the next few weeks about what is this God actually like, who allows some of these things to come and to make life interesting, shall we say, on occasion, and downright awful for some people. I'm not trying to make light of this at all, but we have to face up to these things, don't we? And we've talked long and hard over the last couple of years about some of these difficult things that many people have had to face. And a few of us have lost loved ones over the last. In fact, we heard of somebody else in our family who actually died today, an older person, and these things are happening obviously all the time.
I'm really sorry to hear that.
Very difficult.
We've excuse me, we've had a comment from Denise. Thanks, Denise. I suppose he never said it would be easy. After all, it took him to the cross. Excuse me. That's something that we're going to be thinking about in the next couple of weeks, certainly, about Jesus' cross and what that has to say to us in this whole issue of this whole question, important question of why suffering.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would disagree with you, Andy. I think I used to believe God intervened, and I don't anymore. Because of that question, if I believe God intervenes sometimes, then why doesn't he in this particular situation? You know, name the situation. You know, all kinds of awful things that happen to people all the time. I can't believe in a loving God, who would fix some awful things and not others. That's where I'm at. But
Now, I do understand the difficulty, and I haven't walked in your shoes, so I haven't got the experience that you've got, and kind of vice versa. And we can only talk, of course, about that experience. Some people say that our opinions aren't what it's all about, of course, and it's actually what God says in his Bible, which is what really counts. I know when we discussed your book, we talked very much about what it means to trust God. Do you want to maybe talk a bit about that, about trusting God, the way that you do that now, should I say? Sorry to put it on the spot there, but it's page 79, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, for me now, trust God doesn't mean trust it will all work out, trust that God will heal you or heal someone that you care about. For me, trust God means trust in the kind of person that God is. Trust that God is loving. Trust that cosmically God is in control. In other words, at the end of all things, there's this great line from I think it's The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, where one of the main characters, he always says it'll be all right in the end, and if it's not all right, it's not the end. It's a really lovely way of summing up part of what the Bible teaches, actually, that it will be all right in the end, and if it's not all right, it's not the end. You know, that at the end of all things, when Christ comes again, the new heaven and the new earth are created, it will be okay. But in the meantime, for many people, it is not. And then there's that aspect of hope. We were going to think about we talked about spiritual practices, Andy, didn't we?
We have, yeah. And we're going to try and introduce one each week, aren't we? That's the plan.
That's the plan. So Andy and I love to talk about ideas and talk about our views and our experiences. But we feel it's also important to kind of experience God and spirituality and faith, or to open ourselves up to that. So we were thinking about contemplation. And you know, mindfulness is very very well known now. And I guess what I'm talking about is a little bit like mindfulness, really. But contemplating nature if you like, contemplating creation, can be a way in which we can open ourselves up to God. And I personally found, in my own experience of anxiety, contemplating nature can be really, really helpful. And I went through a phase, Andy, a while back, of looking at mindfulness apps.
All right, yeah.
About anxiety, you know, and I kind of Googled what are the best ones and all of that. And I thought, you know, it's all very well saying, oh, I'll do mindfulness once a week, but I know I won't, you know. But the best thing that I found was an app called Portal. And it's really, really simple. It's just you can select different portals that take you into a nature landscape. So it can be in the rainforest, you're hearing the rain on the leaves, and you know, and it looks like you're moving through the forest, or you know, you can watch a Scottish loch as the sun's setting and the water's lapping against.
Right. So this isn't just sound; you actually see pictures as well. You actually live the experience, as it were.
They've literally taken a camera on a tripod and just kind of pointed it in one direction for sort of half an hour, and so you can kind of imagine yourself there, but it's the sound of the water and the waves, or the leaves, or the wind in the trees. It is incredibly centering.
Yeah, I find nature really, really helpful. But living in the middle of Leigh-on-sea, of course, we've got a couple of parks, and we're very fortunate to have a wood and the mud, should we say, which you can walk along. But for me, for many years, I've taken a walk most mornings. I haven't done the last couple of mornings because I've been stuffed full of cold. Not COVID, I hasten to add, but cold. But for me, going out there and just being quiet and just walking, and sometimes praying, but normally just being quiet, and maybe think about the day, what is actually going on. I found that to be really, really helpful. And when I was away, like I was last week in the Cotswolds, of course, walking by lovely stream with Gorton on the water, just awesome, and just the chill factor. So I like the idea of your portal app. That sounds a good thing to do. If people want something, which we use various things at different times, there's one called Lectio 365, which is something that goes to bits of the Bible and gives you a chance just to be still and to pray, and that it's very much into being quiet with God, giving God some space, which I think is a helpful thing. They do one in the morning and one at night as well, so you can, between me and you, Em, it's turned on. I often fall asleep during the evening one, but I guess that's probably what it's about, isn't it? That was me too.
It's an app, is it, Andy?
Yeah, if people just put in Lectio 365 on Google, they'll find it.
Great.
I checked earlier to make sure on my phone it does work. I'll give you a link or something like that. There are many other things out there. There's Portal. If folks have got one, can I just say that Eleanor Wilcox has come on board here. I think an issue is kind of what Emma said at the start. We all have suffering in our lives. We then feel guilty when we see others who might consider have it worse. So we try to get over it, which doesn't help anyone, and also doesn't help our faith in God. That's really profound for Dora. Sorry, Dora, I'm just being patronising now for fun of it. But I think that is so right. It's good to count our blessings, isn't it? Sometimes as well, of course. Look at the other way around from that. But actually, being told just get over it is something in the past people said about mental health, wasn't it? Just put ourselves together, Rotherham. It'll be okay. You know, things like that. But I think you're right.
Absolutely. Being able to feel what we feel and express that to others and express that to God. And I believe very, very firmly that you know, we don't have to put on a brave face. We don't have to say it's all okay when it's not okay. And in fact, I mentioned the Psalms earlier in my introduction. So the Psalms are right in the middle of the Bible. They are, well, many scholars believe they were actually used in worship in Old Testament times. That the Israelites kind of, these were things that were sung or spoken out loud in worship. And I mentioned Psalm 139, which is a really beautiful psalm that talks about God seeing us in our mother's womb. But they're actually the largest number of psalms, Andy, the largest single group of psalms are actually lament psalms. Psalms where people are crying out to God and saying, God, this is rubbish, do something about it.
Yeah. And in fact, we're having a whole week on lament coming up, aren't we, to discuss that further, which is something you've introduced me to. No, that sounds wrong, like you've caused me so much lamenting time. But you know what I mean? as a kind of concept, which I hadn't really thought about before. And I'm looking forward to that in a few weeks, talking about that.
Yeah.
So I completely put you off then saying that, didn't I?
No, you're fine.
Yeah.
So Andy, I know you've got a question for next week. So you're going to be taking the lead next week, and you'd like some stories from people.
I would. I want people to actually give me some what I call kindness stories. What I mean by that is when someone's been particularly kind to you, and you think, wow, they didn't need to do that, but they just did it. So I've got a couple myself, which I will share, including one about when I needed the loo badly, hadn't got 20p, but we'll keep that for next week, possibly in Southend-on-sea. That was. So there we go. Yeah. Just as we come to an end, because can you believe it's almost 9 o'clock already? Yeah, we've been going along. In my Bible bit this morning, in Lectio 365, actually, I think it was, I want to read something which actually comes from something that Jesus said. And this is a modern translation called The Message, which I find very helpful sometimes. It says this: are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. And to me, that just explains that being quiet with God, whether it's with the portal or with Lectio 365 or just walking or whatever works for you. I think is good. Can I say having time with God isn't necessarily being quiet though. Those of us who play the trombone, for example, anybody play the trombone? Comments? No. Okay. On the trombone, for example, know that to worship God and to have time with God and seeing Him smile, I think sometimes. There we go. And many people I know dance and all kinds of wonderful ways of just expressing and having time with God. Did I run there? That was good. So, questions, folks, for next week. Send via Facebook or the emails. Kindness story.
Great. So people can just comment on whether they're watching on Facebook or YouTube. They can just write in the comments if they'd like to share a kindness story, or email us at lifeandsoul@lrbc.org.uk if you like. And just let us know if you're happy for us to give your name. If you'd rather to tell the story anonymously, that's absolutely fine too. So we're going to be using those to kick off next week. So we're back next Wednesday at 8:30, Andy, is that right?
Yeah, and apologies for technical issues. Luckily, I've got my wife's laptop here that survived. My phone, I don't know what's going on with it tonight, but we'll have a look before next week, hopefully. So there we go.
We got there in the end. So yeah, send us your comments, folks. We'd love to hear what you think. We'd love to hear your questions, your thoughts, the things that you'd like us to address perhaps in future live streams. So let us know, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, take care. Bye-bye.